What what got you guys to start? Like, what inspired you guys to start the film initially?
Right. So the inspiration, um, essentially, it was two things. I felt it was important and kind of a maturation point for FPV and the FPV culture, to be told. The story could be told. There was enough content. There were enough influx of pilots. There were enough influencers. The technology was strong. You know, there's a lot of points where I felt like the inspiration got to the point where I could make a film. I could make a documentary film about it, and that it was a time that it was timely. And it is so crazy. I tell you, within 1 month, uh, we realized, okay, the FAA just released the NPRM, so it'd be the technically FAA UAS NPRM, um, and we had a situation on our hands that was a conflict. And every story and important film includes not just an expose on an amazing topic, but the fact that there is a conflict and we have to overcome it. So that's what the film encapsulates. It's
Yeah.
completely 2020 from January 1st, or even before January 1st, in the middle of a comment period, to the protest at the end of February, and then to the final ruling in December 28th. So it's really just all 2020 in a nutshell, and so the inspiration was capture that, because this is history in the making.
And on top of that, you had the whole pandemic thing going on too. So,
Mhm.
Yeah,
how
add
that
to that.
impacted everything.
Yeah, add to that. And so the initial conversations, like with Joshua and Drew, they were so open, and without their openness and supportiveness and long conversations on the phone, and me presenting like story arcs to them and getting their feedback, without them saying like, yes, this is something that needs to happen, this wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
So
I had the idea to make a different film that I pitched to James. We were at a whoop race in
yep.
Tennessee. You came down for it. And I pitched that. We started talking about 3D printing, and then we were
Hmm.
just spitballing ideas. And and James, you had a history of making films. You had a documentary on Netflix before. I was like, oh, well, this could be somebody who could help do this. But we didn't really know what would work as a film. Like just let's make a film about FPV
Right, exactly.
isn't useful. And when Remote ID came out and there was this threat to the FPV, to basically the existence of FPV, um, James was just like, this is it. This is our crisis moment, and we can tell the story of FPV through this conflict.
Yeah, and it's not that we're like, oh, we get to make a movie now. It was really like, oh, we need to lobby for this.
Right, right.
We need to make a film because people need to know how awesome this underrepresented, and naturally it's an underrepresented community, because it's a niche community.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, it just seems like, from everything you said, everything just sort of lined up. Everything was just
Hmm.
kind of lining up for the perfect scenario for this to happen, and the interest to peak and those kind of things.
Yeah.
Um, and then so you started the conversation like 2019 ish to get this going.
Yeah, I
It's
think in December, or maybe,
maybe a
wasn't
little
that when the
earlier.
Whoop race was? And
It
we
was late 2019
Yeah,
for
sometime in
sure.
that time. The first person I ended up actually interviewing was Steele at his house in Georgia, which
Mhm.
we ended up, throwing aside that interview because it was early on, and having to do some redo interviews. We did that as well through the year. But um, that was kind of a moment where I felt like confident that we could get access to some of the pilots that are, that have a
And,
larger following.
I,
But
in fact, I remember saying to you, James, I remember saying, like, who should we go for first? And I said, you should try to get Steele first, because
yeah,
I basically said, we can't make the film if he's not in it. You can't make a film about FPV without him being in it. So you
Right.
may as well try to get him
Yep,
first.
that's right. Jay, just so you know, Jay, like the ethics brand is kind of worldwide. You'll see
Mhm.
pilots, you know, anywhere in the world, and they're wearing like brands, whether it be Rotor Riot or Ethics. There's some brands that are just like, you know, you're going to see everywhere, and it's a big thing in the community. You know, everybody has their own brand. You'll find out
Yeah.
all these details in the film.
Well, yeah. What are some of the things that you learned that maybe you didn't know, and even Joshua, you too. Maybe there's things that open, like, oh, I didn't realize they thought this way, or I didn't think this was this way. Is where there things that you learn in this journey?
Yeah. I've certainly learned a lot from James about what it takes to make a real film and not just a YouTube video that you shoot in your basement. The skill set that James brings in terms of, like, when we were talking early on, James laid out, he was like, okay, here's what we're going to do. And then at the end of this flowchart that I've outlined, then you have a film on Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever. And I was like, wow, there's actually like, there's a plan. Like, I wouldn't even know where to begin with that. You want me to build a quadcopter, I totally will. Um, it's been great seeing the diversity of people that are in FPV, the different experiences and perspectives that people bring to it. Just getting to see all these people sit down and interview has been really insightful.
Yeah.
And James, what are some things that you've learned in this journey?
Yeah, I definitely was, you know, looking from the outside in. FPV, I think even Joshua makes this point in the film. You know, it can sometimes be a solo sport. It can be a solo activity where you are the only person maybe in your small town and you're working on your ability to build and fly by yourself. Maybe you can connect up with on a Facebook group, try to get into something that's local. But really, for me, I was kind of a solo pilot, someone that built and flew since 2018, and to be able to watch influencers on YouTube and then go and meet up with them and film them and interview them, and get to know people who are in the core of that group more personally. That was probably number one. What did I learn about FPV? That those who kind of have taken the leap to jump into FPV drone filming as either profession or full time, whatever that platform might be, it's quite a tight knit community. It really is. They bounce off each other. They look at what everybody's doing. There's this awareness amongst smaller circles that it almost doesn't matter what country you're in. They really seem to feed off each other. It's pretty amazing to see.
And this is I guess for both of you guys, but maybe Joshua, you too. But how what have you seen with the I guess the changes or the growth of the FPV community, starting early on to kind of where it is now, where it's going now? Where have you seen the community going?
Well, there's always a challenge as what starts as a real niche hobby or sport grows and gains wide scale acceptance. Um, in the beginning, FPV was extremely technically challenging. Very few people even could do it. Uh, as it has gotten more popular, that has eased a little bit, although it's still very technically challenging. And we're seeing the original people who sort of paid their dues have to learn how to accept and integrate people into the culture who maybe haven't gone through that same grind because now they don't have to. And I think that's something you can see happen in lots of different activities. It's certainly not new. There's always some resistance to that, I think, among the old guard. But there's also a lot of potential as you get more people into it, as you gain larger acceptance, as more money comes into it. There's potential to do things that you just couldn't do before, and it's gotten pretty cool. I remember seeing drone racing, DRL, Drone Racing League. It was on ESPN. Now it's on NBC, and I was in a bar, a pizza joint, having lunch, and DRL was on the television, and I was like, "Oh my god, what is happening? This is not just a tiny niche hobby anymore."
Right. Yeah, that brings up a whole other perspective too. I thought similar about that when you see DRL, especially that it's on a major network now. They've negotiated, they're on NBC and the NBC family. So it's one of those things where it's like, does this establish it? Does it legitimize it? Does this make it a thing? I mean, it's not on the same level as ESPN2's axe throwing competition anymore. Now it's actually a
Right.
a legit thing, and there's there's race stars and there's sponsorships and there's big things. So do you see DRL and also just FPV as a whole? Do you see this becoming more of a mainstream, less kind of niche hobby
Well,
sport thing?
yeah, I think the big question that people inside FPV are debating is, does drone racing being on NBC legitimize it, or does it mean that it's finally like sold out?
Right.
Right? Is it legit if it's backed by big money and it's on television, or is like the true soul of FPV guys out there just bashing their stuff at a bando somewhere? And to me at least, I think you can have it both ways. I don't think the fact that some people are taking FPV mainstream and winning prizes and being judged, I don't think that in any way stops people who feel like what their calling is going out and flying at a bando from doing that. I think you can really have it both ways.
Yeah, that seems to be the challenge, especially with any creative undertaking. Everybody kind of goes through that. Every creative community kind of goes through that growth spurt, growth change and stuff, where it's kind of like, are we selling out, or are we just growing? Are we just evolving?
Exactly. Yeah. And let's not forget also that those guys, Paul Nurkala, Vanover, Evan Turner, I'm going to not be able to name all of the DRL pilots, and then the ones I didn't name are going to be insulted. So I apologize. All those guys are the same guys who are out at a bando on the weekend bashing it. Like, it's really weird that there's no conflict there, really, So I feel like the soul of FPV is well in good hands.
Yeah, I definitely think that an organization like DRL putting such a high value on production value to push it out there, it kind of spearheads some way for visibility into FPV. And then people that peak interest will get on YouTube and see Joshua's channel.
I hope so.
You know?
Right. And yeah, I was actually watching a couple of your clips too, just to learn too, but because I'm stepping into the foray of FPV as
Awesome.
well.
Awesome.
But it's interesting from a from an education standpoint. The other thing too is you have colleges and even high schools now that are looking to get into this drone building, drone racing, and you have this kind of Gen Z interest, and kind of from the grassroots kind of thing, where the kids are coming in and say, I want to just go ahead and make this. I'm going to be making the drones. So you have these 13-year-olds that are just making their own drones because they're watching your YouTube video, your YouTube channel, and they're making their own. So it's inspiring generation. But those guys are the ones that are like just immersed in this, as opposed to a lot of us that are more established, that kind of found it, grew into it, and kind of thing. These guys are born into the technology. So
well, I think again, you see this in a lot of fields. If you look at skateboarding, BMX biking, snowboarding, you start out with some people who kind of invent the sport. They're the first one to try doing that kind of thing in that way, and then the next generation that comes along is born into it in a way that the first generation wasn't, and suddenly they're just leaps and bounds better. There's 10-year-olds, 14-year-olds out there that just do things with multi-rotors that boggle my mind, and I'm just like, forget it. I wasn't even the first generation of FPV pilots, for what it's worth, but it really, those guys come along and they push it forward in a way that many of the original founding pilots just never could.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Because they had to break ground.
Yeah.
And these
Yeah,
new guys didn't
there
have
were
to.
definitely some of the original pioneering pilots. Some of them have stuck with it in the community, and some of them have moved on. Some of them have other careers, So, but we all know those original pilots that we can say and point to, like, that guy inspired me.
Mhm.
That guy got me into it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, these 10-year-olds are the ones that, I always tell students, I say, it's not the people that you train with or you graduate with that you're competing for jobs. It's the 10-year-olds that can just do it 10 times faster because they're just used to it.
Mm.
So and they're just thinking about it. So um and and then James, I guess this is more of a question that you might be able to chime in on with the idea of FPV, not just with racing, but the idea of FPV being used in films and commercial production and those kind of things. You start to see a lot more FPV shots, maybe not so much in like mainstream films or anything like that, but you're starting to see them definitely on commercials, and a lot more incorporation in filmmaking. Is that something you've noticed or you've incorporated or you've seen?
Yeah, definitely. It is fully incorporated in the film. There are pilots who do many different facets. The three main categories of FPV are freestyle, racing, and cinematic in the focus that we have. And, you know, there are other ways that you could categorize the use of FPV, but I think those are three solid ways. So cinematic has its own chapter, and it follows some of the main innovators who build the platforms that allow FPV pilots to carry what are called heavy lifters. And these types of drones require an added amount of innovation to lift cameras where there's a perfect convergence, say with smaller form factor cinema cameras that can be lifted. So the FPV drones then are taking on a significant amount of weight compared to what they usually are, but then they're able to maintain a compact form factor. So you are hucking around $10,000 or $20,000 drone in terms of equipment on it, but you're getting fantastic shots. You're getting angles and movements, and you have the control to move a camera drone. An FPV drone with that type of camera on it now is just phenomenal. So you're starting to see some of that innovation take place. Specifically, it escalated in 2020. So we have touched on some of these newer platforms and the innovators behind them. So it's really exciting. It's an exciting time to see some of these really highly skilled pilots, whatever their background might be, um, to be able to pick up this type of a heavy lifter. And you also see more traditional heavy lift, big platform, custom drone um, companies that do aerial cinematography that are adapting into their offers and packages on sets and on commercials this type of flight, whether it be a full-on freestyle, GoPro drone, which they did quite a bit of that, but now they're also doing the heavy lifters with the cinema cameras on them, and it's just going to add so much dynamics to any type of professional work that you're going to see going forward. So
Yeah, I've seen a lot of the drone cinema companies that have had the FPV with the GoPro, and they're zipping around like, hey, this is another tool that we use for filmmaking. But now with the innovations with like Alexa and Red and stuff, making the smaller, lighter as much as you can have a lighter cinema camera, and having that quality, and the ability to have build an airframe that can lift that and still have the FPV technology aspect of it. I see. You're right. I've seen a lot of those companies looking towards that and moving to embrace that. And
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the next, let's say, 5-ish years. If you think of any filmmaking technology, there's a time when it's introduced and no one knows what to do with it. And maybe it's technologically a little bit crappy, like think about green screening or Steadicam. And then filmmakers start to figure out how to use it. And then suddenly it opens up new ways of filmmaking. And right now, I think we're in that initial phase with camera with freestyle style drones being used to film. Like lots of people are using heavy lift drones with like a red on a gimbal, and you're just replacing a helicopter or a crane. That's not fundamentally a new technology. It's just a cheaper, smaller helicopter or or a crane. But freestyle style drones, racing style drones, can move in ways that cameras never could before. And I think one of the reasons you don't see more of it is that just directors and DPs just don't know what to do with them yet, but they're going to figure it out. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah, you also want to hire someone who hasn't been in FPV for just a year or two. You want someone with some serious backing and consistency to throw your $20,000 camera drone around on, FPV
Yes.
drone around on you.
Yep. That's what the insurance is for.
I was just going to say that's why you get insurance, but yeah, you're right. That's what I was thinking is that drones in filmmaking, just drones in general, the Inspire 2s and those kind of things, and a Matrice with with a gimbal on it that can carry a larger cinema camera. They're being used now, and they're being shot, and they're being incorporated into films and all kinds of content. But that freestyle FPV aspect of it, with the zipping and the turning and the different perspectives and the quick, the quick speed aspect to it, is something that's why I'm just now noticing. I've seen it more with commercials. I think commercial film makers and content creators are embracing that a little bit. They're getting it a little bit more.
I think a lot of times, and I'm certainly not an expert on this, so it's a grain of salt, but I think a lot of times commercials are more desiring of that kind of dynamic shot, whereas films are just a little more conservative in the type of shot that they want. So like I'm thinking of a shot that Tommy Tabahia did for, I think it was a motorcycle commercial, and he dives down from a building underneath a bridge and then tracks the motorcycle. That might have been a CG shot in another day, right? Or but he just did the shot. But a lot of times in a film, you just don't want that kind of shot. And maybe you never will, or maybe they'll start to figure. It also has to do with the audience's willingness to tolerate and to want to see that kind of shot. So more FPV pilots, maybe we'll see more FPV shots in films.
Yeah,
Yep.
I was going to say, I think it's the consumer demand too, but I think again, going back to the whole generational thing, I think you have this YouTube generation, this younger generation, this young TikTok generation, I guess, that's kind of coming in, and I think they're embracing things, and I think as they grow older, and I think the technology is going to change, and I think you're going to see a lot more clips like this and a lot more technology infused into what we consume. So you'll see a lot more FPV freestyle stuff, shots and films. Maybe not like Avatar or anything like that, but stuff like that.
James Cameron is pretty good at coming up with technological ways to advance films. That's why it takes 10 years to make them. We interviewed him once. He's a smart guy. He really is. He comes up with innovative stuff. But directors really, from what I've heard down the chain, talking with pilots who get on sets, the directors themselves are demanding these platforms more and more for creative flexibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been talking with a handful of cinematographers just for the film festival, and it's interesting to talk to them, and they're a little bit more traditional, a little bit more traditional in the way they were trained and what they shoot and how they think. So the idea of giving them a new toy, they were just saying it just opens this whole creativity. So now now we have a whole other tool set. And then what I was kind of going for is that the FPV kind of adds on even more, like a whole other next level dynamic for them.
Yeah, what's really interesting about FPV, and you see it a lot in comments. Josh could probably attest to it. The fact that most people will see an FPV clip, whether it's social media maybe first or commercial, like you said, they'll kind of get an idea. Okay, this is different than a normal drone. And then if they do eventually try to pick up FPV and they get it ready to fly, they make comments like, this looked really cool and maybe, harder to do. But now that I've tried, I have a great respect for the people who can do this very well.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes I get questions from people and they say, I'm trying to fly my drone and like, it's just all over the place. I can't maintain position. I can't maintain altitude. And they're like, what's wrong with my drone? And I have to stop and go, is there something wrong with their drone? Or do you just not know how to fly? And they just don't expect it to be as hard to fly as it is. So
Yeah, they think of the one they just bought at Costco,
Right.
and it holds hover, and like, oh, I don't have to touch the sticks, and it's still right there, and
Yeah.
yeah, so it's a different beast. It's a different concept, but I think it's when you get it kind of a thing. So I think when the audience gravitates towards that, and when they do fly and they do it, and the other thing too, I think also for the FPV community, that's kind of the filter.
It is.
That's kind of
Yeah.
like, we're not going to let
Well,
everybody in.
you have to,
Yeah, yeah.
there's a conflict between wanting to make it accessible so more people can enjoy it. But I mean, this idea that there's a filter, I don't think that you have to have a filter, except in as much as safety is involved. Like there's skydiving, there's a filter. They don't let you just jump out of a plane because they don't want you to hurt yourself. And the same should be true with drones. You can hurt people with them. But there's a fundamental conflict that if you dumb it down too much, then you lose the thrill and the fun. So you want to make it easier to do in ways that don't dilute the fun of it. And that's a tough line to get right.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think that's the case too. Like I said, I think the fact that this film, and when people see it and people get excited about FPV and they say, I want to go out there and do it, I'm gonna get one, I'm gonna fly it. There is that level of, again, filter seems like such a bad term, but
Yeah.
there's just that level, that knowledge level or that experience level, and it's going to hit that point, that threshold where somebody's going to fly it, they get frustrated, and they're going to either commit to doing it better
100%.
or give up.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so those that commit to do it better are going to be able to move into the community, and those that give up, then hey, they tried it, nothing ventured, nothing
Yeah.
gained, move on, go, I'm going to go back to my Mavic, kind of a
That's
thing.
right. Yeah, we talk a lot in various chapters in various ways in the documentary about, the adoption of FPV, whether it be in simulator or the adoption of learning to build because it's kind of a must.
Mhm.
There are many points to cover on that, but yes, there are points at which you can enter and be great at the simulator, and that's very heavily recommended that people just buy a controller, plug it into a simulator, and start to learn it. But you also, at the same time, the argument goes that unless you fly a real drone, you might not get the full taste of what you're in for and that commitment that would grow out of the sensation of real flight in FPV. It's kind of like you need a little bit of both. You definitely need to start on a sim, but you do need a physical drone in FPV and get that adrenaline rush and that
Hmm.
excitement,
Yeah.
and that sensation of flight to catch you, to keep you in it.
Yeah. Because it's good. It's a struggle. It's a struggle from the beginning, and the struggle gets a little easier, but it never goes away. Like if you're, I like to say, if you spend half your time flying and half your time fixing your broken quads, you're actually doing really well. And sometimes people get into the hobby and they're like, there's so much to learn. And it seems like I'm always fixing my stuff. And I'm like, you're going to learn it. It's going to get a little easier. But at the end of the day, you have to want it so bad that you're willing to sort of crawl through glass. And I wish that weren't true. I wish it weren't true. You have to learn electronics, computers, soldering. Flying. There are so many skills you have to learn to enjoy this hobby. And currently, only the people who want it the most actually get there. I think that's a shame. Um, and I hope that going back to your question about the hobby growing and becoming more mainstream, I hope that as the hobby grows and becomes more mainstream, it can become more accessible to people who don't necessarily have all those skills.
Mhm.
Maybe it might add for a lot more collaboration. Maybe it won't be just a solo hobby, it'll be a collaborative kind of hobby between programmers and pilots and those kind of things, or machinists and pilots.
Right.
Everybody has
Yeah.
this kind of skill set that they bring. So
This
Yeah.
is true.
um
There are a lot of skill sets that are involved in it. If you think about it, it kind of parallels the maker culture. If you've ever heard of maker fairs and more STEM education, so it's perfect for that, and it plays into like we were talking about the next generation. If they have their hands on, they will be much more confident in this.
That's what I figured from, from what I've seen from youth, kind of coming through this concept, and it's just going to be, second nature to them as far as just embracing it and implementing it.
Yeah.
Um, I want to, I guess, take a minute to let's talk about the film itself, and let's talk about the actual, there's chapters in the film and there's sections of the film. Can you tell us kind of
Yeah,
more what
sure.
the film is?
It is a 3-part docu-series because of the length and the format and the style. It's about 6 chapters per segment. So there are 17 chapters. And we have, some fun fly days. Some chapters are more topical based. And of course, we definitely follow the thread starting out pretty early on in the first, uh, you know, episode of the film. We're going to be going straight into the day of the protest, and then following that up with talking points on the reactions to remote ID. And you learn quite a bit about what was going on at the time. And most people still probably are not even aware of what regulations were being proposed and what's being implemented. But ultimately, it's not just affecting FPV pilots. We want everybody to know this is something that was affecting anyone that has to do with hobby flight, and also, camera drones, wings, whatever it is you're flying. The airspace is changing in a drastic way in the next 5 years. That's a no doubt. There's no doubt about it. But how and what will that space look like for drone pilots who are hobbyists or FPV building and flying? It's a very critical point. So uh, we have that in the first section of the film. The second episode, there's some exciting chapters that have to do with the parallel between skaters and FPV pilots, risks that people take for getting the right shot. You've got the parallels that, drifting is such a great pair with FPV. Drone racing is in there, and another fly day. And then, the third episode of the docuseries dives into some of the culture, fun parts about the culture. We've got the Part 107 license that parallels with cinematic FPV because, FAA has you get a Part 107 license, and that's important to help educate. What does that look like? Why do you need a license? And then what can you do cinematically in kind of that world? And then we finish up with being able to give a good depiction of what is it like to build a custom drone. Joshua built a complete drone that we sourced parts for. He came over to my place and we built it from start to finish, and then we flew it before the sun went down. And we also have in there like simulators, how to get involved and learn flying in a simulator. And then, of course, STEM education and innovation. And really hitting that point on innovation, that being able to continue to build and fly is really important. So, yeah, there's so much of like wide ranging topics in the film. But, um, I think it's progressed pretty well to be both educational and inspirational and fun. These are there's a reason why these people are influencers on YouTube. You know, it is fun, and they kind of lead the audience through that learning and exploration of this world.
Yeah, that's well, that sounds like a lot. I mean, because there's so much to cover, as we talked about,
Yeah.
even the multiple skill sets that you need just to fly. But now, you're embracing the whole culture aspect of it. So, um, so it's and like I said, it's great. But so where is it now? You guys are finishing up the film, and then um, looking for distribution and that kind of a thing next, or
Yeah, so you submit to film festivals, you reach out to producers that create content for different streaming platforms. We're excited to be able to show at a couple FPV drone events, and that's this year. and also perhaps have some private screenings for people who are in the film. So we're excited. I'm excited, one, to have the community watch, to celebrate. If they like it, like you said, will they approve? I think they will. They love all the influencers involved. Um, the second thing is that we want this. The goal ultimately is to get this out there, to have the most amount of people see this, to experience what FPV is, and also to uh, to basically, like I said, educate and to entertain and to inspire. And the people that catch that inspiration will jump on YouTube or a platform where they can learn more about it, and maybe take up the hobby. We don't know. But all that to say, like with regulations and in terms of how that's going to play out, it's still a story that isn't completely finished. And we want to make sure that we have a stake in the ground. This is our stake in the ground. We have, everyone can learn about and experience our world, whether or not they enter into FPV, drone building and flying.
Yeah, I was going to say that the film does kind of a twofold aspect of it. It seems like it does cover the inspirational aspect and education, and this is the community, and this is what they do, and this is what FPV is, but in maybe subtle or not so subtle way, just to be like, and it needs to be protected, it needs to be defended,
Yeah, right.
and here's these regulations, or here are these things that could jeopardize it. So if you like it, help us, kind of a thing,
Yeah, well, I guess it's a small point to make, but it was significant in the beginning where they were saying there might be a mobile app where people could see the pilot's location, the drone's location, so that the general public would have power in their hands to implement regulation.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And if you put it at that level, if they are trying to make safety calls on something they don't understand, that would not be helpful for your local PD.
Right. It causes more problems than it does. It
Right,
does
right.
solves them.
It's one of the things we wanted to do with the film was like we are such big fans of FPV culture, and we know what it's like to be in it and experience it, and we think that there's something really fun and special there, that FPV as an activity is rewarding in its own ways, and we want to share that with people through the film and have them go, oh, this is amazing, to give them that experience of seeing FPV flight and going, I want that, but also to give them a sense of what FPV culture is like and the people who are in it, and and I hope that people who watch the film who are in the FPV culture can be like, yeah, they got it right. And I hope that people who are outside of FPV who watch it will be like, yeah, I want a piece of that.
Right. Right. Yeah, you're serving two masters in that case, and that's actually sometimes challenging to do, especially to be true to the FPV community, because you could
Yeah.
totally just go out and just sell it as like, oh, it's amazing, but then the FPV community would look at you as like, oh, you're just putting out false
Well,
information, just sensationalizing things.
yeah, we wanted to get as many people from as broad a spectrum of FPV in here as possible. It would have been really easy. Like when I sat down and I said, who are we going to have in the film? It would have been really easy to just name like the 5 people that I fly with and talk to the most and be like, yeah, but we didn't want it to be a JB and Rotor Riot production. We wanted it to represent FPV as a whole. And so we worked really hard to get people like Mr. Steele, like Trappy got interviewed, some pilots from overseas, although obviously it was hard to travel. We weren't able to travel, but we were able to do remote interviews. Um, Cinematic pilots, freestyle pilots. We wanted to really get as many aspects of FPV as possible into the documentary.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of it actually, I reached out to people on social media to be able to make connections. And because so many people are tight knit in the community, it's easy to jump from one to the next and, oh, this person and that person, and I have so and so's contact, and so I was able to do remote interviews over Zoom sometimes, when we were able to get a camera on the other end, and I knew some things could be set up properly. Otherwise, I was taking the risk during COVID year and getting out and interviewing whoever I felt and also talking with Joshua about, you know, would this person be good? Would this be a good ad? You know, I bounced off a lot of ideas of what could be potentially in the documentary with Joshua. And, you know, we did end up getting a larger influx of people after the trailer was released.
Mm-hmm.
So believe it or not, there was a lot of kind of later in the year production because so many people thought this is what we need to be involved in, you know, and that opened a lot of doors, but it also, you know, made a lot more work near the end of the year. And, you know, up until this point when people are just shipping me last minute hard drives, you know?
Right.
Here, put this here. You need to add this. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Even today, you know, several pilots, they're like messaging me, you have a website of this film. When can I send you my footage?
Yeah.
You can't. Sorry, guys.
Yeah. We obviously a great way to include. I mean, obviously, we wanted to interview as many people as possible, but there's only so many interviews you can actually fit into a film before it just becomes too long.
Right.
But including people's freestyle footage is a really easy way to get people in the film. And I don't. How many do you? Could you even guess, James, how many pilots sent freestyle footage and have little clips in the film?
Yeah, there's over 50 pilots represented in whether they have one clip that's 5 seconds or they have like minutes of footage. It really depends on, it's not necessarily about me favoring one pilot or another. It really had to do with me doing the audience a favor of selecting everything that was the most relevant and the top, you know, quality footage that was depicting all of the different categories of flight. And what's so interesting about this, you know, Jay, the fact that when people watch this and they don't have any idea, even if they have like a drone and they watch, you know, a lot of influencers on YouTube that do a lot of maybe camera drone work, their photography focus or videography focus, they're going to watch this documentary and they're going to look at the many facets and how complex and diverse and fascinating FPV is in the whole world of FPV. They're going to see all of these different topics and chapters and types of flight, and really it'll open up a world of opportunity hopefully for them if they already are a pilot, you know.
Yeah, and the fact that there's you know, pilots that are submitting stuff now, especially because you just launched the website, so now people are really going to the website and people are trying to like, oh, include this, include this. And you're like, well, we can't. But what that does is that piques interest in the film itself, and then, you know, then when you start planning the sequel, you know, then
let's get through the first one.
Oh my gosh.
right.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, but
Was, well, great. I think that kind of wraps it up. I want to thank you guys just because I don't want to take up too much of your time. And we do want to get out there, and we will show a clip of this, a clip of the film at the festival, so people can go ahead and kind of log in and get inspired and kind of see what's going to come when the series comes out. So so I appreciate your time. I appreciate both of you guys taking the time out and
Thanks, Jay.
talking.
thank you, Jay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us and giving us a chance to talk about the film and talk to you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.